Specializing is so outdated. You don't have to be the best. So often, we feel behind. Other people have already figured out what they want. Other people got started earlier. They're sure of the path they're on, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Of course, I didn't come up with all these lines on my own. I was actually referring to an episode on the School of Greatness podcast, episode 817, which is titled How to Find Your Highest Potential. On this episode, the guest is none other than David Epstein. And if you don't already know who David Epstein is, he's the best-selling author of the book Range: How Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. Now, in this book, he starts off with a story of two boys. The first story is a boy whose father at 7 months gave his son a putter to fool around with, and this boy dragged it around everywhere he went in his little circular baby walker. At 10 months old, he climbed down, turned over to a golf club that had been cut down to size for him, and he imitated the swing that he had been watching his father do. Now, because the father couldn't yet talk with his son, he drew pictures to show the boy how to place his hands on the club. At 2 years old, this boy went on US television and used a club that was tall enough to reach his shoulder to drive a ball past an admiring Bob Hope. And in that same year, he entered his first tournament and won the 10 and under division at 2 years old. This boy's father knew that his son was the chosen one, and he started prepping his 3-year-old to handle the media attention. He quizzed the boy, teaching him how to give curt answers, never to offer more than precisely what was asked. At 4 years old, his father would drop him off at a golf course at 9 in the morning and pick him up only 8 hours later. And of course, sometimes with the money that he had won from those foolish enough to doubt him. At 8 years old, this boy beat his father at golf for the first time. Of course, this father didn't mind because he was convinced that he is the chosen one. Now, it's time for the second story. And the second story is about this boy whose mother was a coach, but she never coached him. He would kick a ball around with her when he learned how to walk. As a child, he played squash with his father on Sundays. He dabbled in skiing, wrestling, swimming, and skateboarding. He played basketball, handball, tennis, table tennis, and badminton over his neighbor's fence. And of course, not soccer, football. That's the way you say it. And his parents had no particular athletic aspirations for him. They encouraged him to try a wide array of sports. He didn't mind what sports he was playing as long as it included a ball. Though his mother taught tennis, she didn't want to work with him because she quotes, "He would have just upset me anyway." He tried out every strange stroke and certainly never returned a ball normally. That's no fun for a mother, and rather than pushy, his parents were in fact more pulley. As this boy began to gravitate towards tennis, if they nudged him at all, it was just to stop taking tennis so seriously. And as a teenager, he was good enough to get an interview with the local newspaper. When he was, of course, this boy was competitive, but when his tennis instructors decided to move him up to a group with older players, he asked to move back so he could stay back with his friends. And after all, the fun was hanging around after his lessons to talk about music, pro wrestling, or football. By the time he finally gave up other sports to focus on tennis, other kids had long since been working with strength coaches, sports psychologists, and nutritionists, but it didn't seem to hamper his development in the long run. By his mid-30s, an age by which even legendary tennis players are typically already retired, he would still be ranked world number 1. Now, of course, I would review who these two people are in due time, but first, intro. Hi everyone, welcome to the Better Podcast, where I aim to help people not be good or be great, but become better. I'm your host, Melvin Cito, and this podcast is one about making yourself better, especially in emotional and mental management, relationships and communication, and of course, some episodes focus on self-management, just like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing on Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and even YouTube. And finally, if you're not new here, it means you enjoy the content, so share this with someone else who will enjoy it as much as you do. In today's episode, I'm going to try something new. For those of you who have been listening to this podcast for some time, you might have gotten used to the format of heavily scripted and perhaps even slightly overproduced episodes. But since this podcast is about becoming better, let me share with you my journey as well. I promise this is going to be linked to this episode, so bear with me. For those of you who know me, I'm certainly a generalist more than a specialist. First of all, I studied triple sciences in secondary school. I did biology because my mother had been telling me to go be a doctor. And being a little cheeky at that point in time, I wanted to be a gynecologist. But sometime around 1998, I decided that computers were the future. So I started a diploma in multimedia computing, after which I pursued a degree in information systems and management. And after which I graduated and started off in a marketing agency where I spent 2 years. After which I joined real estate sales and I wanted to be a bigger part of a big brand. So I joined banking in Standard Chartered Bank. I moved on to a wealth consultancy to be a financial advisor. And finally, I am here today in a training company and a fintech doing marketing. At the end of it all, I think calling myself a generalist is understating it, isn't it? And it gets better. Within marketing, I don't only handle the marketing strategy. I write for them, I design for them, I do all the video shooting, I edit all the videos, and basically I do a bit of everything and anything, including the product management, the technological integration, basically everything it takes to make sure that what our participants see is a good final result. And of course, on the side, I do my own podcast. And this is entirely self-produced, self-edited, self-scripted. I recently took a break from this podcast because my wife wanted to spend a weekend with me. She asked me if I were to go out on a date with her. And honestly, to feel that from her, it made me think a little bit about the production effort. As you know, this podcast is not easy for me to produce. Firstly, I start writing on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. I record on Saturdays. I edit on Sundays. I do the final editing and uploading on Mondays. I do social media on Tuesdays. So yeah, it's really a bit too much. And to work on it every night and not be able to spend any time with her, so much so that she had to ask me for a date, it really broke my heart. So I met up with a podcast producer, Danny. If you're listening to this episode goes out to you. He gave me some ideas on reducing the time I would spend on writing and marketing, but I thought of something even better. I'm going to generalize my skill set even more and make sure that I can reduce the amount of time recording, editing, and writing even more. So if you're new here, you don't have anything to comment on. But if you're not, be sure to give me your feedback and how it compares to the previous episodes. Tell me which format you prefer. More importantly, visit the YouTube link in the show notes and you might just be slightly surprised. Now back to the topic. Of course, traditional wisdom dictates that you should be going all in on your strengths and outsource everything else. But is that really the case? Now back to the original topic. You might have already found out that the story of these two boys, the first boy is Tiger Woods and the second boy is Roger Federer. Now, of course, we all know these two as elite level athletes, but we've also heard of the 10,000 hour rule of expertise, which states that you need to clock 10,000 hours of highly specialized training in order to gain mastery in a certain domain. Now, this is true to a certain extent because they did this study of 30 violinists, and these people have been extensively tested, repeatedly performing the same or similar tasks, and it shows that elite athletes spend more time in highly technical, deliberate practice each week than those who plateau at lower levels. And of course, this is true because Tiger Woods, of course, he spent, I don't know when was the exact point he clocked these 10,000 hours, but I'm sure it was in his childhood. But does this rule apply to everything else? Now, here's a hypothesis that has to be tested. Elite athletes at their peak of their abilities do spend more time on deliberate practice than near elite peers, but scientists have found that at a younger age, those who go on to become elite athletes typically devote less time to deliberate practice in the activity in which they will eventually become experts, and instead they undergo what researchers call a sampling period. They play a variety of sports, usually in unstructured or lightly structured environments. They gain a range of physical proficiencies from which they can draw and learn about their own abilities and proclivities, and only later do they focus on one area. And it goes on. In late 2014, a team of German scientists published a study showing that members of their national team, which had just won the World Cup, were typically late specializers who did not play more organized soccer than amateur league players until age 22 or later. They spent more of their childhood and adolescence playing non-organized football and other sports. Another football study published 2 years later matched players for skill at age 11 and tracked them for 2 years, and those who participated in more sports and non-organized football but not more organized soccer football practice / training improved more by age 13, and it's been replicated for other sports as well. But more importantly, is it going to be applicable in the working world? I have this article over here, which is the ultimate career choice, generalist versus specialist. Of course, you need to know the definition between a generalist and a specialist. We all know them. Generalists kind of have a bad rep as a jack of all trades but a master of none. But is this really the case right now? And can you survive as a jack of all trades? In the working world, generalists tend to have loosely defined roles within organizations. Let's take the example of healthcare. You might work as a general doctor or practitioner. Your work may include attending patients that could be young or old and have a variety of ailments from life-threatening to a simple cold. And on the other hand, if you're a specialist, the role would be more defined and you'd be dealing with similar cases every day. For example, as a pediatric surgeon or brain surgeon or cardiac surgeon, you know how it works, right? In the working world, a generalist with knowledge of a broad range of issues can see deeper inside this interconnectedness and find solutions that a specialist might not be able to see. All the different departments within a business, they connect with each other. So a generalist can help see this bigger picture and come up with ideas and solutions that benefit the business as a whole. On the other hand, a specialist have gained knowledge in their particular subject, which is hard to come by, and therefore a position of a specialist can be valuable for a company. The organization often has a few specialists operating in different sectors, which means the whole of the organization could rely on their expertise. This not only provides a higher chance of a better salary, but can also provide the specialist with more internal power. For example, you might be better placed to negotiate when it comes to implementing new management structures or other issues. And as a specialist, you have the opportunity to become a true thought leader in your area of expertise. But at the end of the day, what are employers looking for? A 2013 study in the UK found employees believe that specialists are under threat. Around half the respondents told they have a generalist position in a company, even though they were originally hired as a specialist. Both employees and employers told researchers a more generalist skill set is often required in order to advance to senior positions within a company. Companies also pointed out that they are hiring fewer specialists. At the same time, the increase in generalists might not be as appreciated as one could think. In fact, the same study found employers worried about the impact of hiring fewer specialists, and even employees said they feel less motivated as responsibilities have become more generalized. Furthermore, the researchers pointed out the study was done at a particularly tricky time in the economy. Companies have turned to generalizing as finances required fewer people to perform the majority of the tasks. But all in all, the most important part is this: specialists should also be aware of the way jobs are changing. A number of traditional jobs are currently facing the threat of automatization. Specialist jobs, such as a stockbroker, can already be performed to some extent by robots and programs. The job climate is rapidly changing. While changes to the workplace will affect all of us, specialists and generalists, specialists stand to lose out more. Because down to the narrower skill set of the specialist, which means in order to find a new job, a specialist has to re-educate. But this might just be the most interesting part of this article, which says that some are suggesting that the future career path may look more like generalizing specialist versus specializing generalist. Lev K, the founder and CEO of CredSpark, wrote about these two categories. The definition of these two career paths states: a generalizing specialist is someone who starts out as a generalist but also has in-depth knowledge over a particular area. A specializing generalist, on the other hand, is someone who specializes in a particular field but also has a broader understanding of the other aspects of the business. Now, at this point in time, you might want to put yourself into either of these two boxes, whether you are a generalizing specialist or a specializing generalist. For myself, I'm clearly a specializing generalist who is specialized in marketing, but I also have a broader understanding of the different parts of the business, which I am currently in: the tech, the design, the content generation, the finance part of the business, and even how to sell our programs to our target market. But at the same time, I see myself even having to learn more, developing myself into a generalizing specialist, because I have to focus on something else right now, which is content marketing. Now, the bottom line is this: future companies are likely to require both skills. Dr. Jules Meyer thinks it's more about the synergy between the two groups. Organizational structures would require both types, and the question shouldn't be about which is better. Both provide value to an organization, and communication between generalists and specialists is needed. Personally, I define this as being a specialist means you are testing the boundaries of your knowledge. You are learning deeper and deeper into a particular subject that you become a subject matter expert. On the other hand, being a generalist means you're testing the boundaries of how much you can learn from every different domain. And the key here in being a successful generalist is not to be just a jack of all trades and just dabbling in all of them, but rather to exercise lateral thinking in tapping on what you have learned from these different domains and putting it all together for the biggest skill needed these days, which is problem solving. And to what extent do you need to learn these skills to? In this article written by Atakin Tank on medium.com, He says that the most innovative developments of the future in business, science, and the arts will come from creative generalists who blend unique disciplines with technological skill sets. So I believe that this is the most important word, technological. And we all know that computers and artificial intelligence would change it all, and some of these jobs will be made obsolete by artificial intelligence. But what roles will be left? Those that require creative problem solving, innovation, and humanity. You need more proof? Just refer to this. Ironically, the majority of mankind's biggest breakthroughs haven't come from specialists. They have come from multifaceted individuals. Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick, his background in physics and intuiting the structure of DNA. Richard Feynman, another Nobel Prize winner, generated his ideas about quantum electrodynamics while watching a guy spin a plate on his fingers in a cafeteria. The realization came after Feynman had rededicated himself to interests outside of physics. And all these stories point to the same conclusion. Severe specialization stifles creative problem solving. Some of you may have heard of this saying, if all you have is a hammer, anything looks like a nail. Let's go back to David Epstein, and over here you can see that he writes the same saying. Of course, I stole it from him. Interventional cardiologists have grown so used to treating chest pain with stents, metal tubes that pry open blood vessels, that they do so reflexively even in cases where voluminous research has proven that they are inappropriate or dangerous. A recent study found that cardiac patients were less likely to die if they were admitted during a national cardiology meeting when thousands of cardiologists were away. The researchers suggested it could be because of common treatments of dubious effects were less likely to be performed. So, okay, Melvin, you convinced me. I need to be a polymath. I need to be able to get domain expertise in different fields in order for me to be a deep generalist. How do I do that? Don't worry, I've got you covered. Jake Chapman, founder of Gelt Venture Capital, has mentioned that he seemed to have found the answer in Pareto's principle. You want to be good enough to handle 80% of the problems. So 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. In other words, a small amount of work produces the majority of the results. So when you're talking about a simple problem to solve, like say language, polyglot Benny Lewis advises novice language learners to focus on their target language's 300 most frequently used words, because they represent approximately 65% of the words used in the conversations they will ultimately have. He broke down the process of diversified learning into 5 stages. It starts from being a layman, and you move on to becoming a beginner, being an apprentice, being a journeyman, and finally, being a master. In 12 days, you're able to become a layman. You're cocktail party conversational in a field. You can ask smart questions. In 2 months, you'll be able to be called a beginner, where you have a working understanding of broad concepts and field underpinnings. By 10 months, you would have a mastery of basic concepts in a field. But it takes someone approximately 48 months in order to become a journeyman in a field with some unique insight. Now, here's a very easy example for any of you listening or watching to understand. After spending 2 years looking after a baby, can a parent say that they are an expert in taking care of a child for the first 2 years of their life? Maybe not. But are they good enough to provide some unique insight? Yes, they absolutely can. And that's all you need. All you need to do is to spend at least 2 years in a particular field, learning the ins and outs, enough for you to provide genuine, real insights into a certain domain in order for you to solve problems on a bigger scale. And that is what I really hope that I can achieve for myself. How about you? Would you like to achieve this as well? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Of course, you can also comment on any single aspect of this episode, whether you're a generalist, whether you're a specialist. Share with me your journey, share with me what you have done, and how do you intend to move forward in the future. Let me know in the comments, PM me, write to me, send me a snail mail. You get the point. And that's all the time I have for you in this episode. Do all the things you need to do on podcasts and follow me, subscribe, whatever you need to do on YouTube as well. And I'll see you in the next one. But before that, you don't have to be good or great. Just be better.